Welcome back to the Josh Calloway Podcast. This is Josh Calloway, State Representative here in the 10th District of Kentucky. And I have an exciting topic tonight. Got a couple guests with me here for the podcast. Have Miss Laura Voyles and Mr. Adam O'Brien. And I'm excited to have y'all here. We have a great topic to talk about. And I believe tonight that maybe we'll be able to get some facts out about some things that have been suspect in regard to people wondering what's going on in Breckinridge County with CWD, chronic wasting disease. And both of these people have been impacted by it in different ways. And we just wanted to bring that out. We want to get the truth out about how it's impacting them. And then there's some unknowns that are out there that we really can't get to the bottom of, but we want to make sure that they're highlighted. And so what I want to do, I guess, Adam, I'll just have you introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about your business, a little bit about what you do. And then Laura will do that with you. And then we'll move into some questions.
So Adam O'Brien, lifelong resident of Breckinridge County, still work for the Army as we were talking earlier. I think in about 2017, give or take, we decided to open up a fair chase outfitter in the county. We started with about 2,000 acres, did about 20 hunts a year. Since then, we've grown to 10 to 12,000 acres. We run about 100, 120 hunts a year. We built a lodge, that will house 22 people. And, we do about $350,000, $400,000 in revenue a year, which almost all goes back into the community. We take none of it home. We guides, caterers, this, that, and the other from out-of-state revenue. And we were really booming until the state cut us off at the knees. So,
well, when you talk about hunters, 100 to 120 coming in, are you talking about specific states they're coming from all over the country?
We target.
Where do you target?
We target south and east. So Kentucky is known as the first big buck state as you move west. So if you're coming from the west, they're going to stop in Kansas, Illinois, Iowa. But as you move from the south and the east, we're the first one, and we're the first one that allows baiting. So they'll come through Tennessee to come to Kentucky because it's a bait state. And when they reduce that, then they're going to go to Ohio or the other states that still allow to bait. Kansas looked at stopping the baiting several years ago, and when they saw the financial impact it was going to cause, they got rid of it. So, it's a good business. We help a lot of people in the community. We help a lot of farmers. Not like any other small business in this community that doesn't need the government helping them out.
Exactly right. And Miss Laura?
Hey, I'm Laura Voyles. I am one of the owners and operators of Sinking Creek Whitetails, a deer farm here in the county. We got started back in 2020. So in kind of like the latter months of COVID, we decided to branch out from our farming to encompass high fence deer, and started building the fences in October, November of 2020, got our first deer on the farm in January of 21. And this year we were kind of selling our first big set of shooter bucks. So it takes a few years to turn that around, buying bred does, and then moving into having those babies be born. And the typical age of selling those is around 2 years old. So this fall was our first move into that.
Good. This, what I think I'd like for you to do, maybe just talk about the CWD positive that you had, how that came about, and maybe just a little bit about what CWD is, and then we'll go to some other questions. But if you could kind of explain that a little bit.
Okay, so the doe that was said to test positive, she actually didn't die. She was a very healthy 4 to 5 year old doe that we had brought onto the farm in January of 2022. So she had been on the farm for over 2.5 years. We actually decided to harvest her. So this year we were really gearing into building up our genetics. We have been putting some good genetics into the deer these last couple of years, and our doe population had got to where we could veer away from breeding some of the ones that we didn't have pedigrees for and focus our breeding program more on the ones that we have pedigree. So this doe was one of the ones that we had decided to cull and to harvest. for meat. So we took a look at the 25 to 30 that we were planning on culling for this upcoming breeding season. And she just looked so great, so healthy, full. And so we selected her to be one of the ones that we were going to harvest for meat. And then we have to test 100%. Any deer that's over a year old on the farm, if it dies or we harvest it, we have to extract the brainstem, lymph nodes, send those into a national lab and have it tested. So when the results from that deer came back, it showed to have been tested positive for CWD.
Is that national lab? That's not an independent lab? That's a government lab.
It is. Yes, okay. It's the national.
So
it is a government lab. Yes.
You're telling me that the picture that I saw on the news of the emaciated deer laying beside the stream, that wasn't your deer?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No. So we did notice in those first few days when it started being pushed through the news that there had been the first case of CWD in pinned deer, farm raised deer within the state of Kentucky, that the pictures that were associated with that were emaciated deer. Some of them looked like they had probably been laying dead, found in the woods days later, was absolutely just for attention grabbing and not accurate at all, had no bearing on what had actually happened.
And just go through the timeline a little bit, how long this deer had been there. And, I know you mentioned that y'all started in 2020. How old was this deer? How long do you think it had had the disease based on the time frame that it can show?
Right. So the scientific evidence that was provided by the lab in the testing showed that she could have only had it for 6 to 8 months. And she's been on the farm for 2.5 years. We had bought several other does at the same time we bought her. Any of those from that farm that have been harvested or have died in that time frame have also been tested 100%. And all of the deer that we have brought onto the farm since her, we have now killed and tested to see if any of those deer happen to have brought it onto the farm, and all of them have tested negative. So she didn't come onto the farm with it, and none of the others that were brought onto the farm at the same time have tested positive.
And you've tested how many deer since she tested positive?
We have tested at least 8.
Okay.
Around that.
So basically, when that happened, that's when it started affecting everybody else. So Adam, when they had the positive test, immediately the commission got involved. And just so everybody understands, when you have deer farms, you have a fence that all the deer are inside of, and that falls underneath the Department of Agriculture. Predominantly. We
are dual regulated by Fish and Wildlife and also by the Department of Agriculture, inspected differently. Fish and Wildlife, we have to pay them annually, an annual fee for the regulation that they provide. They send out a representative to inspect the farms at least once a year. There are certain parameters that have to be met as far as spacing on the outside from trees, anything that could fall on it, weeds, any issues with the fencing. That's all regulated by Fish and Wildlife.
So dual regulated.
Yes.
But when you have a CWD case in the state of Kentucky, immediately Fish and Wildlife gets involved. And so how did that come about? Did you find out about what was going on? I know you reached out to me, but you were getting bits and pieces of information.
So obviously it hit social media. And like she said, they were showing pictures of EHD deer. They can call it what they want. Those emaciated deer by waterbeds, or EHD deer, which kills thousands of deer in Kentucky every year. It has nothing to do with CWD. It was a scare tactic. So we started hearing some rumors that there might be a baiting ban put in place. There might be X, there might be Y. Did some research on, there was a CWD plan if it was found in a wild deer, which happened, I think, down in District 1. There was a different CWD plan if it was found in a captive deer. And in the beginning, I didn't really think this was going to affect me. I hated it for Larry because Dad has a relationship with him. But at the end, this was theirs.
Right.
And so it wasn't until I started hearing rumblings that, hey, they're going to start changing your regulations, that I called you and was like, hey, we're going to have to do something, because, you know, we follow our rules, we do what we're supposed to do, but yet we're being impacted negatively for something that, like you said, is, where did it even come from? And was it 6 to 8 months? Who knows? I mean, because like I said, it was a government agency that tested it, that we can't do independent testing on.
Yeah, talk to that a little bit. So you send it to a government facility to be tested, and that's the end?
Right. So when that test came back positive, and we knew that this came from a deer that wasn't even symptomatic, one of the best looking ones out there, we asked if there could be alternate testing. So we requested, and even through the Department of Ag, tried to request that they allow the samples to be taken from that national government lab to be sent to a separate, just a third party lab for basically blind testing. And they refused to do that. It was basically just a self-proclaimed, we're the gold standard, therefore what we say goes, without any recourse or options whatsoever. So there's a lot of concern with that, just because, like he said, where did it come from? If you look at the map, that shows where CWD has been in the past. Even the case that was in Western Kentucky was close to Tennessee, where there have previously been cases. And you can look at the state of Kentucky and see that it's never been tested and found anywhere near here.
Yeah.
And so there have been instances in the past in other states where there have been false positives. And so we were really trying to ask them to be very thorough, knowing that there were going to be a lot of implications, not just for our farm, but for other deer farms in our state and other states. There was going to be a lot of impact to landowners and hunters, and to be refused to have any alternate testing, like it's there and nowhere else. We're not even allowing for the possibility of human error. There is definitely a lot of concern related to that.
I'll just say that's a problem.
Yes.
Right. So I'm going to bounce back and forth here. Yeah. So when that happened, they got the positive test back, positive results. The commission gets involved, and then the commission met.
So we knew the commission was going to meet. And that was at which point I started emailing commissioners. I spoke with you, I spoke with Nancy, and I started emailing commissioners, trying to ensure almost exactly what she said, like, wait a minute, like, we're having this meeting to put regulations in place when we don't even have all the data. How can we set forth rules and regulations when we haven't even met with everybody? Like, I can't believe the commissioners didn't say, let alone her and their Larry's farm, hey, wait a minute, let's pull this sample out. Let's test it again. Let's check it, because it was in a lymph node, not in the brain. And I don't hold me to it, but I believe in Texas, they went through this whole thing and then finally did independently test it, and it was a false positive. So that was when we got involved. And then the commission essentially had an hour meeting with the Department of Agriculture, briefing them, and they just took everything there said as the gospel, and then they voted on it and moved on.
So the vote that they made encompassed a couple things, right? It encompassed baiting. So maybe explain just a little bit what baiting is to people that may not be hunters. So
as a fair chase outfitter, we're trying to put 100 people a year on a wild deer. I think we run at about a 42% success rate with about an 80% opportunity rate, which is they had an opportunity at a deer, whether they messed it up, they missed a shot, this, that, or the other. Well, a huge portion of that is putting out corn.
Right.
We're trying to get these deer to come to a one centralized location. And I hear all of it. Well, if you're a real hunter, if you're this, if you're that, these people are here for 4 days. Mm-hmm. They work a job. They have a family. They come to Kentucky because it was a bait state. When I went into negotiations with these hunters last year, that's a question that's always asked.
Right.
Are you a bait state? Will we be hunting over corn? Will we be hunting over food plots? Will we be hunting over mineral sites? X, Y, and Z. We agree to a contract. They sign a contract prepared by our lawyers. And that's the agreement they have.
Right.
Now they're going to come here. They bought this hunt a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I mean, we have fellowship groups that buy them 3 years in advance.
Yeah.
And they're going to show up and say, well, where's the corn pile? Well, the state decided we can't bait after they made this year's rules. That's not the deal I have.
Yeah.
I'm going to need a refund or a partial refund. That's fine. But now I have a contract with her or you to lease your farm. Well, I can't pay. I think our lease bill is about $200,000 a year in Breckinridge County.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I give all these hunters their money back because the state changed their rules, now what do I tell these farmers, again, who have binding contracts with me? So the state changed the game for me midway through the season without even any input from us or from hunters. And it's not just me. It's kids, it's elderly people, it's people that are out there hunting for meat that only can come down for the weekend because they're working a 9 to 5 because God knows in this economy, it is what it is.
Right.
So
as far as the impact that it has on you, I know this hit all of a sudden. Some people already had corn out. Some people were already doing some baiting, and they didn't require people to actually go out and gather it up. But the impact that has on you.
So for me already, so we had our first big hunt somewhere around Halloween. We had turned away, those 20 people wanted to rebook. We didn't. I'm not taking a rebook from you. And that has followed every weekend since. So I'm already 60 hunts in the hole going into next season because I can't with a good conscience and take their money.
Guarantee that
and
you can
the other part that's being missed here is for people that might not know, this isn't statewide. So for me, I'm competing against other outfitters that are in Grayson County, that are in Jefferson County, that are in Davis County, that are in Nelson County, that can still bait. So now, what do you think they're telling people? Like, I know you've always gone to bluegrass. They can't bait anymore.
Right.
So now I'm fighting the state, and rightfully so, these other outfitters, which is the same thing I would do when you're trying to compete.
Right. Well, it's a business for you.
Right.
It's a business. And so inside of the response plan basically said a 15-mile radius, right? So when they drew that marker, they basically come up with all of Breckinridge County, all of Hardin County, and all of Meade County.
Right.
But that is not all the counties that 15-mile radius encompasses, right?
So it also touches Grayson County, and it's not a 15-mile. It would have been too easy to be a 15-mile radius because that's what the regular. No, so if that 15-mile radius touched your county, then we took the whole county. So we have portions of Grayson County that the 15-mile touches. Actually, it's 12.7 miles away from what they call the index site. I have farms in Meade County that are 35 miles away from the index site that are included, but Grayson County has farms that are 12 miles that are excluded.
Yeah.
So we took our regulation and then we picked and choose what we wanted out of it so that it met the agenda that the state had.
Yeah. So there was some conversations that happened this week, and we'll talk about workable solutions a little bit, and I want to come back over to you and ask some questions. But there was some conversation this week about the 15-mile radius, and is there the potential to look at precincts? So if we went to the index site and we went with every precinct that 15-mile radius would touch, then that would at least narrow the impact down of how this is affecting people. So when we talk about workable solutions, I'm going to give you my feeling here in a little bit of what I think a good workable solution is. But is that something that would maybe lessen the blow on your business?
Oh, absolutely. And it would also lessen the blow on the community because I lease farms at X dollar an acre. Everything in those 3 counties, at a minimum, I'm going to offer half at a minimum.
Yeah.
I'm going to take my money to Hancock County and lease ground. I'm going to take my money to Ohio County and lease ground.
Right.
And so if it was down to the 15 miles where I could still lease in Battletown, I could still lease in Cloverport, I could still lease in these towns that are way far away from the index site. Yes, it would make an immense change. Now, it's still going to hurt those people in the index site, which is ridiculous because I know I have landowners that are retired that literally I had a landowner call me today and say, hey, could I get my money a little earlier because he had his taxes due?
Right.
I mean, they depend on this money. We're not in a rich community.
Right.
Like you said, the blood, sweat, and tears you put into your farm, you didn't have $1 million investor. Like we're not from a rich community. This money matters to people.
Right.
So when you talk about regulation, up to the point of the deer that tested positive, had you had any issues at all with maintaining the regulation with the inspections that you had at this point? Had you all been compliant? What kind of shape was your farm in?
Yes, definitely compliant with all regulations, from the fencing regulations that's monitored by Fish and Wildlife, and then all of the Department of Agriculture regulations. We have to send an email report for every deer that dies, letting them know the tag numbers. Deer are dual tagged when they are raised on a farm. All of our records were impeccably kept. We use a software system to track our genetics. We have huge whiteboards in the barn showing what deer are in what pen. All of the pens are fantastically kept, lush green fields. The deer are given, I call it a bougie food mix, that the protein amount varies based on the season. It's been tested multiple times for the total digestive nutrients so that we make sure we are getting good nutrients to our deer. We go out there every single day, replenish their water with clean water. So everything was meeting all regulations, going above and beyond, even from a record keeping standpoint and a health management standpoint.
So where are you at now? Are you all still in business?
So we are under what's called quarantine currently. Like the day that they were notified of the positive case, they immediately came to the farm and gave us quarantine notices, which doesn't allow any movement of deer into or out of the farm. And so movement completely stopped. Even deer that we already had had taken deposits on that were going to be sold, and stopped the movement of other things like some testing that we were doing and additional things that we were trying to do to improve on our genetics and our health. Everything had to completely stop at that time. And then they started talking to us about what our options would be going forward.
And where did you have something?
Yeah, I think what was, and mistake me if I'm wrong, but Dad's done most of y'all's vet work on that farm.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think what's being overlooked, Josh, is you know that the state vet and the Fish and Wildlife vet never called him. He is the doctor that has signed the documents on this particular farm for the last 2 to 3 years. We have this case come up, and you don't even think you should call the veterinarian that has worked on this farm. Like, you don't even care enough to get the input from the professional on the ground.
And we have a very consistent back and forth relationship with the vet's office. They have to sign off on every deer that we bring into the farm, on every deer that we move out of the farm. It's highly regulated. And so we have that very consistent communication with the vet's office.
Yeah. The only people that didn't have communication was the state talking to the locals. Their relationship, Larry's relationship, and is great, is my understanding.
Yeah.
First name basis.
Right.
So where are you at now? So you are not able to move. You're in quarantine, but where is this headed?
Right. So they say that there are options that are available. The USDA federal regulations state that you can be under quarantine for 5 years from the last positive test, and potentially move out of it after that point. However, that really is not even a viable option. They call it an option, but really the forced option is just complete eradication of every deer on the farm. We actually are referring to it as massacre, because that is actually what it comes down to and what is going to happen. The reason that that's not viable is that anybody with any kind of common sense knows that if you have a business that you're operating, you would not be able to go 5 years of only investing, of only putting money in and caring for and managing with zero possibility of any kind of income from that. There is not a single business that I know of, especially small business, even more especially any kind of farming business, who would be able to sustain only pouring in for 5 years with no possibility at all of any kind of income in return. And the 5 years is really, it's written, but it's not a viable option at all.
And why can it not be so simple to say, all right, we're going to depopulate 25%. If those 25% all test negative, We're going to let the other 75% roll. 40%. Why does it have to be 100%?
Yeah.
And it goes back to the same thing we're dealing with is the state wants samples. Well, if you gave me a goal for samples, if you said, you know what, if we get 1,000 samples and they all test negative, we're going to raise the restrictions.
Yeah.
5,000, 10,000, 500, 400, I don't care what the number is. Then there's a goal. We're working towards a common goal.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
As it is, I'm probably going to get crucified for this, but I'm not giving them any samples. You came in, cut me off at the knees, gave me no other options or alternatives, have no recourse of if I do this, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
So
But yeah, there's no end game whatsoever.
So get your own samples.
So it's
Absolutely.
basically, and I think the question was asked there was a local meeting that was held. You and your dad got up to speak a little bit. It got a little bit interesting for a couple minutes. Just people not understanding. And I've said this over and over. When it comes to the hunters, most hunters do not care about what's going on at your farm as long as it doesn't affect them.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever government gets involved and it affects them, then they do care, And so I'm sure everybody's wondering one thing: how do we get back to hunting like we used to?
Right.
That's
And
pretty much
rightfully
it.
so. I mean, even when you were talking earlier about the economic impact from a business standpoint, I even think of it from just a family impact that it has for people who, again, mentioning the economy that we're in and just people working to put food on the table. This time of year, a lot of people stock their freezers. And so we're talking about a lot of trickle down effect just on people who hunt to have meat in their freezer to last for the upcoming year.
I have 10 guides that are working just for Christmas money. They work this time of year for Christmas money. We have a list because like a lot of your clients, our clients are high-end. They're not here always for the meat. We have a list of low-income families in the community that we call when we have excess deer meat that we give to people that has been paid for, processed, and ready to go. Like you're taking money out, you're taking food out, you're taking pastime and family time away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're just getting involved in something that, not you, Josh, but the government's getting involved in something they don't have any business being involved in.
No, I agree with that. And that goes to my next question to you. So ultimately, what I'm hearing you say is that your business is a total loss.
It will be, yeah.
And the government will come in and be a part of eradicating, massacring, killing every deer that is on your farm.
Right.
Now, so say we do the massacre. They want to call it, they like to call it depopulate. They like
Depopulation.
They like to church it up. Then can you open back up?
We can't.
Right.
So that's
you're
the reason.
done.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's another point of the other, like there are other options and we're choosing this. We really have no option but to choose for them to kill them, because even in the regulation, when they talk about doing antemortem testing, which is live testing, they church that up too. But they have allowances within the regulations to do live testing. Even if we live tested everything on our farm right now, 130-ish deer counting all of our fawns that were born this year, we would still be locked down for 5 years, no questions asked, even if everything else on our farm
And your feed bill
tested
a month,
negative.
approximately.
I mean, a couple of $1,000, a few $1,000.
Yeah.
So
Just for feed.
What do they want you to do with your farm? So you just have to eradicate all your deer and it sits there for 5 years, empty, vacant. And so who's gaining out of that?
Well, this is the thing. I know it sounds silly, but I don't know if y'all saw Peanut the Squirrel a few weeks ago.
Oh yeah, I've heard.
If you was familiar with that, did you hear about Peanut the Squirrel? So there was this guy in New York.
Oh, I did hear about it.
And he had got the squirrel and it was unhealthy or sick or something. And so he brings it into his house and he nurses it back to health. And then he starts an Instagram account, and it was the first squirrel to get 1 million Instagram followers, right? I mean, this guy starts a recovery place for animals and is funding all of that through this. And then the government comes in when they find out that he has this squirrel living in his house with a search warrant. They go through his house, they take his squirrel, and they euthanize it. They killed it.
Yes.
The government.
For what purpose? And that's exactly where we are with this situation.
And that's the thing that I really want to highlight is that the government should never be able to tip the scale on somebody's business, on their life. And so, and I think you mentioned about regulation. Like, if there is regulation, okay, these are the regulations. But once you put regulations in place, get out of the way and let me run my business. Right. But whenever it is an all or nothing solution, it's not a solution at all.
Not at all.
Right.
This isn't fair. I mean, we're on totally different, like what I'm doing, what she's doing. But I mean, now you've got 30, 50, 100, whatever it is, acres that are just useless.
Yeah.
Useless. And so the government's going to take away this ground that was producing revenue, that was paying taxes, that was helping the economy. And we're just going to say, well, too bad.
There were some questions the other night about why had they not already depopulated or killed all the deer that are there. But I know there's something to do with the plan, that there's amount of time you got to work through the plan for what little bit of indemnification that there is. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. So by regulation, they have up to 60 days to put what's called a herd plan into place. And that basically is what they're going to require us to do. And part of that herd plan, the regulation requires that they offer us what's called an indemnity if basically because we're being forced into just killing everything that we have and losing all of the investment that has been put into it. So the indemnity is basically just a small subsidy. It's going to be not anywhere near what's been invested or what the deer are worth, because there are maximum amounts that can even be paid. But in order for them to give us a herd plan, they have to be able to offer us some bit of indemnity, and that requires a pretty lengthy process of the state working with the federal level. The federal level states that their pot of money is already tapped out for the year, have already, paid out all the money that is allocated for indemnities. And so essentially there's just a lot of question about how they are going to be able to put that into place to even offer us that. So that we're still in the waiting game of that whole process.
Okay. And as far as you go, you're just hung out there in limbo at this moment, because if they don't remove the baiting ban, then you've either got to change your business model, you've got to go outside of the 3 counties and hope they don't extend it to that.
Right.
Or you just lose out on hunters.
Right. Because, so not only are we losing hunters, my land contracts come up in January. Mm-hmm. So not only do I have to get my hunters re-signed, now I have to go into negotiations with landowners and try to explain to them why I'm going from $25 an acre to $12.50 an acre, or 10 or 8 or whatever we decide is feasible.
Right.
And so I just need a timeline. Like, the government's kind of like with you, they're out of money. They don't want to do their indemnities. Like, they want to have all the time they want, but then not give us a timeline to say, if we do X, Y, and Z, we can move forward.
Right.
So bluegrass whitetails is essentially going to have to either move out of Breckinridge County, a large portion of its operations, or shut down.
Yeah.
And like you said, 7 years of blood, sweat, and tears.
Over something that they just say, just take our word for it.
Right.
And all of the second and third and fourth order effects that are taking place, like, it is not just our farm. From day one, when they came and were giving all of this information about the quarantine and there's a CWD case, from day one, we said to them, to the Department of Ag reps that were there, how can this be used for good to benefit the state, whether it be deer farmers, landowners, hunters, all of the second and third order effects? We could use this as an opportunity.
Absolutely.
It was the first case in pen-raised deer in Kentucky. What opportunity to use funding that's been provided for research. We have the capability. I've said this to several landowners and hunters since all of this came up. We're very pro hunting and pro hunters. We're on your side, and truly, we can be mutually beneficial. We don't have to be one or the other or have any kind of animosity or be enemies at all, because there can be benefit to wild deer from what deer farmers are able to do, because we keep such a close check on ours and we're able to test for things. Actually, there was funding that came into the state of Kentucky. It had been pushed for and worked for by deer farmers in the state of Kentucky for several years. Lots of work had gone into it. That money, a grant, has been pushed into Kentucky to be able to test for genetic markers for resistance. And so, interestingly, something that we all need to be concerned about when you kind of, track back things that have happened is that the same week that grant money was released to the state of Kentucky, we happened to be the farm that had a sample to be tested at the national lab. So within days, if not hours, of that money being officially released, a grant available to deer farmers within Kentucky to be able to test for CWD resistance markers, there's a positive case on a farm for the first time.
Interesting.
And a refusal for any kind of third-party blind testing.
Like you said, there's so much that could be done here, from testing the soil to testing live animals to testing the feed to figuring out where this came from and what caused it. Like, instead, we're just going to wipe out the herd, shut down all these new regulations on the outside of the herd, give no end in sight. And
a lot of times you're selling to high fence, right? So there are people that have
only selling to high fence. These deer are only born, raised, and die within high fences. Yeah. Nothing ever gets brought in from the outside.
So they're raised to die. They're raised to be killed.
But no different than a hog or a sheep.
Absolutely.
Or, a lot of other hunters are like, oh, you're just killing. There's no difference in these and a beef that we raise in the barn.
Mm-hmm.
So don't.
Right. When you think about it from that perspective, it truly is agricultural. It's for meat. Some people for sport, for the antlers.
And y'all were a part of CALA, the Kentucky Alternative Livestock Association, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And were they the group that was pushing for trying to get the grant?
Yes. A lot of work has been done by CALA to work toward getting that federal grant to Kentucky, because we have several farms within the state and we had never had a case of CWD on a farm in Kentucky. And so the grant was provided after all of those years of working toward that. And then within a day or two, and again, referring back to that map, where could it potentially have come from, right? Mm-hmm. So I know a lot of people brought up the potential of it being able to spontaneously appear in soil. We have had sheep and goats on the farm in the past, but it comes from other illnesses in sheep and goats is the same kind of indications as CWD in deer. There hasn't been a case of any of that in sheep and goats in the state of Kentucky as far back as we could find records. Mm-hmm. So it's every sheep and goat that we've ever sold has also tested negative.
Right. For scrapies.
For scrapies, yeah. And so I know that people could speculate about, maybe it came from the soil, but how and at what point?
Well, why are we not using it instead of killing off the herd? And why are we not trying to figure out where it did come from? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If the soil or a raccoon brought it over a fence or nose to nose or whatever, let's figure it out.
Well, and I'll be honest with you. I know I'm a little bit different, but I have COVID PTSD. I constantly have flashbacks every time that the government gets in the middle of stuff and begins to put their thumb down on people's lives and begins to engage in affecting their livelihood. Then automatically I'm suspicious. And I'm not saying that in pointing fingers at anybody in government. I work with some of these people, whether it be the Department of Ag or whether it be Department of Fish and Wildlife, and have relationships with these people. But this is the thing. If they work for us, I work for you. And so we have to make sure that we get the word out. This is what is going on. We need people's voices to be heard, and you have to hold the people accountable that work for you to make sure they're making the correct decisions that are impacting your life, or just get out of my life. That's what I told somebody the other day. My goal is to get out of your life. I want to get government as best as I can out of your life. We're there to protect life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. That's it. And this situation has really highlighted that a lot of times, just like in COVID, and they can like it or not like it that I said that, but just like in COVID, it's all or nothing. We're just going to carve. We're not going to carve anything out. Except for mandatory testing.
Right.
We'll carve that out, which in my mind, I'm thinking, why would we not want to give everybody an extra tag? Let's test more deer.
Exactly.
And see people. And we saw that. I meant to say this earlier in the meeting, in that mass meeting that was held, when they asked, would you rather mandatory test or not be able to bait? Everybody's like, let me test. I'll bring you the deer as long as I can keep hunting like I always
have. If they
have.
had said, we test 500 or we test 1,000.
We'd have got them to them.
Immediately.
Yeah.
They don't want tests. Have you seen the freezers they put out, Josh?
I
They
haven't.
put out freezers. They're this big. They've got one at the Custer store. It's that big. Well, you ain't getting 5 deer heads in that thing.
Yeah.
They want to act like they're all let's test. They haven't contacted me. I'm right on 60 with a big whitetail sign. Is that not a place you would want to put a freezer? I mean, everybody comes by our lodge all the time. I mean, we are right on 60. Nobody called us about putting a freezer in. They don't want to test. They want to get their government regulations in, kill their deer herd off, and make a point. And
Right. I mean, truly, none of the actions that have been taken have indicated that anybody wants actual solutions or anything beneficial to come out of this. And it truly could, but that's not what is being
nothing was
pursued.
more evident than that when the commissioner couldn't come to the meeting.
Yeah.
When the commissioner couldn't come to the meeting, it showed they do not care about solutions.
Yeah.
I don't know how much work a Fish and Wildlife Commissioner does. I can't imagine you have a lot more higher on the agenda than that meeting. You're not looking for solutions.
It's affecting 3 counties
Right.
and thousands of hunters, literally thousands of hunters, millions of dollars.
Yes.
And we haven't even talked about Broadbent Wildlife Sanctuary, they're in Meade County. I mean, they rehabilitate hundreds of deer a year. They're going to have to stop all the work they do. And I think if you reach out to Jefferson, Davis, all the deer that they find in the city and injured, and they all come to Broadbent. That's all going to have to stop. Because they can't bait or rehabilitate deer either. That was all in their regulation that they put forth. I think that's being overlooked that's not a revenue to our area, but it is an asset to the state, as it's a place that we can bring fawns and wounded wildlife.
Right.
That now we're going to shut that down too, and all those will have to be euthanized.
Right. So when it comes to solutions, I don't know what all the solutions are, but I think it's incumbent upon hunters and people that elect the government officials and the commissioners. I think they are selected by the hunters and then selected from that group by the governor and then confirmed by the Senate, I believe is the process that works. But I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we push and force solutions to happen. Solutions that you can live with and not lose your business, that you can live with and not lose your livelihood. And this is the thing, we didn't go into you guys' personal life, but Laura works for the military. You actually work for the military. Laura's husband is active duty in the military. And so these people are just trying to live their life. They're trying to make ends meet. They're trying to get a little bit ahead, looking at,
chasing the American dream.
We're getting a little older, so we got to be thinking about retirement. We got kids coming up and I got grandkids, and that's all we're doing.
I think what has to happen, Josh, is what I've seen is we have to get something passed that says these 9 people cannot make this decision for the entire state or the entire district. Because let's be real, 8 of those people, they're not even involved in this region or district. Like, clearly if they're not going to take any more time to research this matter and gather data, then we need to take some of that power out of their hands. And maybe maybe in the future they propose something like, here's what we're going to take to the legislator to propose. And we have however many legislators we have, they talk about it and do hearings on it, because it has to get to a broader scale of people that want to make the right decisions, whatever those decisions are.
Right. And this is the thing. With that being said, your livelihood revolves around healthy deer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So there's no way you would be advocating to allow something to go on or to lessen a restriction that's going to hurt your business in that way either.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about non-healthy deer, EHD kills thousands of deer a year in the state. We don't do anything about that.
Right.
We've never found a wild CWD deer dead in the state of Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Never found one dead. There was one killed that was tested down in Ballard County.
Right.
Never.
But it didn't die from CWD.
Exactly. There's never been one found dead that died of CWD. There's thousands upon thousands every year that die of EHD, and it is transmitted in water sources the same way CWD is supposedly transmitted, but we don't do anything about that.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden we're going to freak out over CWD exactly like COVID was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and even so for those who don't know, CWD in cervid, which deer, mule deer, whitetail deer, originated in a lab in Colorado, and it was injected into mule deer, and then they were released into the wild. So that was almost 60 years
I just did
ago.
an eye roll.
Yeah,
You probably didn't see it on the camera, but I hope you caught it.
Guess what? There are plenty of in Colorado.
Right.
There are mule deer everywhere. They are not extinct. So everybody is like panic button response to CWD, but it is not the catastrophic impact that they
There's never been a deer herd wiped
elicit.
out. Never.
Yeah.
Never. CWD's never wiped out a deer herd in the history of time. And I would believe that just like with COVID, that there would be herd immunity built up if we would allow this to work through itself. There's been millions of diseases over the last hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
The herd will work through it. The herd, I don't need the government helping me. She doesn't need it. And the deer herd don't need the government helping them either.
Yeah.
Like, get out of the way.
And honestly, as far as immunity and resistance goes, we, even at the beginning of this happening, we offered, why don't we use this as an opportunity? The first case in Kentucky, let's use this as an opportunity to learn more. This is going to set the precedent for response for cases that come up in the future. And we want that to be a positive impact, a positive bar being set.
Yeah.
Why not use it for testing and research and to be able to build up immunity and resistance?
Well, just maybe briefly, we'll wrap up here pretty quick, but you made mention a little bit ago that your dad was a veterinarian. For how long has he been? I know he has been working with them. And so for how long has he been a veterinarian? And has he, I'm sure y'all have had some conversations about it, just maybe a little bit of his perspective.
So he's been a veterinarian since 83. And one thing that's very unique to him is he did about 10 years at Broadbent. So he did continuing ed and just on wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't speak on the medical side of this, but I will tell you that he is not a believer in any of this agenda that's being pushed. He's not a believer that non-baiting or anything else is going to cause the spread of CWD more or less. As was pointed out in the meeting, there's very little herd touching at a bait pile.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for the record, it's the rut. And we can't cancel that.
That's exactly right.
You know what I mean? So, like, you're wanting deer not to be together. It's the rut. I don't know if you know how biology works, but deer are fixing to be together.
Right.
That's what's getting ready to happen.
Scraping and
chasing.
And
so you're not accomplishing anything other than crippling the hunter and crippling local businesses.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Todd, something that I want to bring it up, and I'm not going to mention his name. We have a local farmer in this community who only sells deer corn. His business over the last 5 to 10 years has been driven. He saw a market and he grabbed it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of corn is sold on futures. You look at at where corn prices are and you sell on futures. He sold no corn on futures. This was all it was going to be. He was selling 200 bags a week at $9 a bag. That man was taking in $1,800 a week. That's what his family budget was on. His Christmas. That, you know how it is. You look
I know
at
exactly what you mean.
He sold 2 bags a week since then. So you're taking a man who had budgeted his entire year on selling corn, and now from 1,800 to 18.
Yeah.
And just like that, you've yanked it out from under him.
Right.
He's not the only one. That's just the one I deal with, and a lot of locals deal with.
It's a great example.
But there's a lot of those.
And
much impact.
And we have to find a way that the government cannot put their thumb on the scale to affect our everyday life.
I've already seen the writing on the wall, Josh. If legislation isn't pushed to pull some of this power away, this is gonna be at least 5 years if we don't do something.
Yeah,
Well,
and it's people who are not at all personally impacted. And like you said, what is it? 8 of 9 of them are not this area specifically.
Why do they care?
It is not the positive setting of a precedent that could have, it could still come out of this, but
we could turn it into a positive.
Absolutely.
But the way that we do that is we protect personal rights, and then we get data that helps us be able to make the situation better.
Absolutely.
And the best way to get data is test deer, you know? So I'm thinking, why are we going to kill less deer? And that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to kill less deer. And because of that, and again, there's people that have the art, there's hunters, I've heard it all, you know, I don't agree with baiting anyway, or I don't think there ought to be deer farms, or I think there should only be high fences and you should never be able to transport. I've heard all of it. We're going to see some of that in legislation. There's no doubt in my mind. But what we need to do between now and January the 7th, which is the first day of Kentucky General Assembly, is be working on a piece of legislation that does exactly this. It allows the government to not be able to get into people's business in regard to their livelihood. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I'm committed to sit down and to work with people on it. But this is what moves people in Frankfort, is when the grassroots people get engaged, involved, and they let their voice be heard. And so that's what I would encourage you all to do, to make sure that you let your voice be heard when you are not being heard. And I think you did a good job of that the other night by saying, hey, I've been letting my voice be heard and nobody's responding.
Right.
You know,
yeah,
just make sure that word gets out. We'll push this podcast out. I know Jim Strader was there the other night, and he brought up about the eating the meat. You know, why are y'all scaring people? Has there ever been a confirmed case where somebody got sick from it?
No.
And so I think it's important, just engaging those people that have a voice. Let's get it out there and work together and see what we can do. And, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm in awe at the fact that, you know, y'all are just sitting here kind of mad, but like taking it, because hundreds of thousands of dollars, I know y'all have put hundreds of thousands of dollars into your farm. I know you know, probably way over that in investment at this point in 7 years. And so, the fact that you have done that, and that we're going to approach this from the right way. This is the way we do it. We get the word out. But so often, whenever situations like this come up, people just take it. They don't say anything. They don't go fight for their rights. And we're in a new day. I think we've seen what happened with the election, regardless of how you all feel about it. I think we are in a new age of transparency, that the American people are demanding transparency. We are never going through COVID again. We're not going back to that era. And I think we just have to force your voice out into that sphere and let it be heard. So anything else, Adam?
No, I appreciate your time. Like I said, I'm glad to get on this platform. And if you were at that meeting, I had my voice heard. I'm not sure it went anywhere, but I was the loudest one in the room. Very frustrated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity too. I think that it's important for people to know that we're not offended at all by people saying, well, we're just opposed to high fence farms and that would fix the problem. But it really wouldn't fix the problem. And what people, just the general population and landowners and hunters all need to be concerned of outside of deer farming is that it was, it's just in a moment. Like you were referring to the impact on, hundreds of thousands of dollars and years of blood, sweat, and tears. The same for him in a moment with no opportunity for our voice being heard, no opportunity for recourse. Right now, that's impacting a deer farm and deer hunting operations, but that could be turned into anything if they can just say, you have to take our word for it. No, we refuse to allow any outside testing. Mm-hmm. This is the one and only response that you will get. That should be concerning to the general population outside of whether or not you agree with somebody guiding hunts or raising deer. Right. That impacts everybody who is a citizen.
Well, it goes back to what I said a little bit ago, and that is that common sense people do not care what other people do.
No.
As long as the government doesn't weight it in one direction.
Right.
And when the government gets involved and it affects their life, then they have no choice but to care. And I get that. Mm-hmm. But it comes down to, we just don't want them to bother us. Just to stay out. If there's a problem, let's get in and fix the problem, not create problems.
Right.
And so that's what we got to do. And
right.
So, I feel like there's going to be like 130 little peanuts laying over there on the Brooks farm. What are y'all going to do are y'all going to bury all the deer on the farm, or
have you heard that?
Going to work?
What they suggested?
4 foot deep.
4 foot. Have you ever tried to dig a 4 foot hole? Like, you think all these people that are killing deer in Breckinridge County is digging up have you ever dug a 4 foot hole?
I've tried.
If you don't have an excavator, what are you digging a 4 foot hole with?
Yeah, you think I can tell you right now, State, you write it down. They're throwing them out in the pasture, and that's what's happening because they ain't digging 4 foot holes.
Yeah.
So the stipulations that have gone around, the ones that we have killed so far for testing since the CWD positive case, the ones that we have intentionally killed to test, they have been buried in a hole filled with lime and overseen by the Department of Agriculture as that was happening. We've been told by other people that we have talked to who have gone through this experience in other states that the process that the state goes through when they come in and massacre all the deer looks nothing like that. Yeah. So I don't know. Once it gets to that point, we've basically said, they're going to be your deer, so we're not going to be here.
Here's your shovel.
So
exactly. Here's your shovel.
There's not space on our property. I mean, you're not using the rest of our property to dig up. But
didn't they say the other night you had to have like a 900 degrees or 1,000 degrees incineration to actually kill the CWD?
My Lord.
And it just comes back to the point
common sense.
That we got to use common sense in these situations. So. Right. Thank you all for coming. I know that it took time out of your schedule. You're right in the middle of hunts going on, and I appreciate you taking the time, and Miss Laura, for you being able to be here as well. We'll get this out, get the word out, and make sure you like, share, subscribe. Make sure if you get a hold of this video, share it out on your social media platforms, on your hunter platforms. Let people know what is going on. That way we can get our collective voices together and make sure we come up with a good solution to these problems. Thank you.